bought their homes in reliance on those ordinances, thinking, well, I don't have to worry. There's no way that a Motel 6 is going to go up next to me.
Right.
And then lo and behold, it does.
Motel 6 went up next to you.
Yeah. So it's really not fair to those people who bought homes in reliance on an existing ordinance to change the rules without giving them input that they're okay with that.
So do you have a favorite pizza place in Arlington?
In Arlington, Mama's.
Mama's, all right. Cool.
Which location?
Fielder.
Okay.
Because I'm a Lamar girl, so.
That makes sense, yes.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions that we have. Thank you so much for coming out. We hope we'll have you back sometime.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
We're here with Michelle Ravitch. Michelle is a friend of mine and an operator of a short-term rental through Airbnb and sometimes other companies. She is a local homeowner, special education teacher, and all around one of the best people I have ever met.
Yeah, she brought us orange juice.
She did bring us orange juice.
That's super nice.
She is super sweet, and we want to ask her some questions like, how did the short-term rental ban affect you?
The short-term rental ban affected me in a number of ways. So first of all, that's kind of taking away people's livelihood. You know, it's something I really enjoyed doing. I almost considered it a hobby just as much as a job, as a source of income. And so now that I won't be able to provide this anymore, I'm actually considering selling the house because, property taxes actually recently increased this year. And without this secondary source of income on my teacher's salary, I'm not so sure that it's going to be a wise investment anymore.
Do you use Airbnb when you travel?
I do. I only use Airbnb ever since I heard about it, and it's amazing. I've actually traveled more in the past 2 years than I probably have in my entire life because of it.
I actually agree. I think I probably have too. Like, we're always like, oh, we're going to Denver, cool, let's Airbnb it. Or, oh, we're going here, let's Airbnb it.
Yeah, especially when you have pets. You know, and children, being able to have extra space and room, there's nothing better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. What do you think was the motivation of the city council to pass the ordinance banning short-term rentals?
I do think that the hotel industry is lobbying for that because I just do not hear a lot of complaints from the locals about there being crazy parties or the streets being crowded. And so I definitely think that there's something in the background.
Are the new rules cumbersome for those trying to operate legally? Like, if you were actually in the entertainment district, would the new rules still prevent you from operating your Airbnb?
Absolutely. Maybe some people can't afford the $1,000 permit. And then I'm sure there's, all kinds of other regulations that they have. I think it definitely impacts them. I'm not personally in the entertainment district, so I haven't looked into it that much, but I think it could.
Do you think short-term rentals adversely affect neighborhoods in Arlington?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they take up an extra parking spot in the driveway, but I don't think it really affects anyone else.
Right.
What is your plan for your property?
Well, I cut off my calendar as of last month, and so right now I'm living there with my aunt and cousin at the moment because they're actually in the process of moving right now. So whenever they do find a house and leave, though, it's definitely a possibility to put it on the market and to go ahead and move back into an apartment.
Before we go, though, do you have any other thoughts or anything else you want to talk about as far as the short-term rental ban that's going to happen?
I would like to talk about that this issue is bigger than just me personally. There are people who are living on their Social Security checks. There are people with children who are autistic who have to stay home and cannot go outside to work. And this is really affecting the citizens of Arlington in a major way. And I think we really need to be cognizant of that moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah. Unfortunate that you're thinking about having to sell your house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Michelle. Hello, we're here with JJ Fenceroy. He is the president of the Short-Term Rentals Alliance group.
Short-term accommodations for residents and tourism.
Okay, great.
The S.T.A.R.T movement.
So we're going to ask you just a few easy questions about, your organization and what you think about the ordinance banning short-term rentals outside of the entertainment district. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so how does this ban affect you?
Yeah, for me, I moved to Arlington a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, and as I was looking for a place to live, I had already been doing a short-term rental in Florida where I was going to school before, after I'd retired from the Air Force, and I was looking for a house here where I could rent out rooms in my home to help defray some of the costs. to help, make up for some of the money that I would need in addition to my military pension. And so I found a great house with lots of space, some great rooms for it, and this ban would essentially eliminate my ability to use that as a short-term rental to rent out my upstairs, my guest room. So now I've got a huge house that I really can't use in the way that I had hoped to when I bought it 2.5 years ago.
It doesn't affect long-term rentals, though, right? Like you could, if it's more than 30 days, you could have a tenant. Is that correct?
Right. You can do rentals of over 30 days. And I have had a few guests that have stayed for longer than that. There's some downsides to that. One is if you get, essentially that would be a roommate situation for me because I do a home share situation instead of renting the whole house. Which, with roommates, if you get a good roommate, that's great. But if you get somebody who you don't really click with that well, then somebody staying there for 2-3 months can get kind of old, whereas even if you don't click that well, if they're there for 4 or 5 days, that's a lot easier to deal with.
Fair enough.
Do you think the short-term rentals adversely affect neighborhoods in Arlington, and why?
By and large, I don't think they do at all. I don't even think, honestly, I think they help a lot of neighborhoods, particularly in areas that could use some renovation. They tend to have the best kept yards, the best maintained facilities, because the guests rate them on it. And if they're, if the house is a mess, if it's fallen apart, they're going to get terrible ratings and they're not going to get more business. There are a few that have been poorly managed. And a lot of times it's just a matter of educating those people. But we found that of the city of Arlington went through this, and of the 428 short-term rentals in Arlington, they found there were only 16 that had 10 or more calls for service over a 2-year period from October 2016 till October 2018. So for those 16 properties, which represent less than 4% of all short-term rentals in Arlington, they're essentially banning 90% of all short-term rentals in Arlington. And those problems, for these 16 we're talking about, a lot of these calls where the car is parked the wrong way down the street, or they put their garbage out at 5 instead of 7. A lot of these were not big things. There were some where there were a few complaints that I've seen that were maybe calls for noise or something like that. But we have ordinances for that. We can take care of those with regulations that monitor that behavior as opposed to banning them altogether across 90% of the city.
So do you use Airbnb when you're traveling? I do. Do y'all use Airbnb when you're traveling?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So have you used Airbnb when you've traveled?
I use Airbnb all the time. I've used it in Italy. I've used it in Puerto Rico. And in places where you wouldn't think that you would even find them. In Branson, Missouri, when I went to my cousin's high school graduation, they're all over the place because they're convenient and they help people out. I stayed with a lady in Missouri who she does board game nights out of her house, and it helps her, be able to afford her mortgage payment without having to take a second job.
Right.
What do you think was the motivation of the city council to pass the ordinance, the ban?
So a lot of this got fired up by a former council member who he lived next to a short-term rental that he didn't get along with very well. They got into a pissing contest. Neither one wanted to back down, and
Names.
he took it as his mission. This is Charlie Parker.
I know. As soon as you said that, I was like, this sounds like Charlie Parker.
He took it as his mission to essentially destroy short-term rentals in Arlington, and he got together with some of his neighbors in northern Arlington, and they went on this fear-mongering campaign of trying to bring people in by convincing them about this quote-unquote danger from strangers that were infiltrating neighborhoods. And they were pretty effective at it. They got, moms up there saying, I'm afraid to let my child ride her bike down the street because there are strangers coming and going in the house. It was so many ridiculous stories out there, and a lot of these were fear-based. The actual anecdotes of stories that happened were far and few between. And the ones that did happen, they were things that things shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have a drunk guy peeing on your fence or something like that. But I've heard one anecdote, and they've repeated it 5-6 times, but they're always talking about the same incident or the same house. So again, there are very few places that are actually having these problems, but they'll take one incident and run with it and just keep repeating it over and over again from several different people.
So do you think property owners should be allowed to use their property any way they want?
The thing with short-term rentals is I can, bring in a roommate, or I can rent out my entire house for 12 months at a time with no problem whatsoever. And in fact, I can do it a lot cheaper because I don't have to pay hotel and occupancy tax doing that. Whereas the state of Texas has a 6% hotel and occupancy tax. City of Arlington adds another 9% on top of that. They're trying to claim that short-term rentals have always been illegal in Arlington, yet they passed a law over a year ago, an ordinance that essentially piggybacked on the state's hotel and occupancy tax law that takes another 7% and then another 2% for the stadiums in hotel and occupancy tax. So we pay 15% tax on top of the income tax that we get from that revenue. So they have not been illegal this entire time. As far as being able to do what you want with your home, I kind of look at it as, if I can rent out my home as a long-term rental, what is really the difference between renting it out as a long-term rental or a short-term rental? People are going there to eat, they're going there to sleep, they're going there to, be with their families, cook. There's nothing unusual about that. And I've heard this whole argument about a slippery slope, and next thing you know, they'll be setting up car maintenance facilities in their driveways and things like that. But that
not
is
if they're.
what?
I don't feel like that's how that would work.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
you never know.
exactly. That's a totally different purpose, and you can do home-based businesses, but that's a whole other thing. And there are regulations for home-based businesses, but this is essentially people staying in a residential property for a residential purpose. Mm-hmm. That's what it was there for, and denying people the opportunity to rent their homes out for residential purpose. It's essentially depriving them of their property rights.
What is the next step for your organization?
Yeah, so the S.T.A.R.T movement, we've got 3 goals. The first is to advocate for reasonable regulations for responsibly operating short-term rentals. The second is to promote successful operations, successful and neighbor-friendly short-term rental operations by sharing best practices with short-term rental operators and managers. And the third is to promote the local economy by networking short-term rentals with local service providers and other businesses. So in terms of the first mission, the advocating for reasonable regulations, we tried hard working with the city to get reasonable regulations. We put forth multiple proposals to them, which are all on our website as well. And in the end, that failed. They passed the ordinance anyway. So our next step, we're going to continue fighting for reasonable regulations. But to do that, the first thing we're going to have to do is file suit to have this ordinance overturned, because this ordinance is clearly unconstitutional. And every lawyer that I've spoken with has said that, except for the city attorneys, who are pretty much spouting the party line on that one.
Hey, how can people get a little more information about your organization?
Yeah, for the S.T.A.R.T movement, our website is startmovement, one word, .org, and there they can find a little information about the Arlington short-term rental movement and what we've been doing. Our proposals are posted up there. We have a document there with facts and fictions about short-term rentals to counter a lot of the misinformation that's been spread by the anti-short-term rental campaign. That has facts and references and things in there, because when you look at the data definitely supports our arguments. And the other side, they provide a lot of anecdotes, but when it comes down to hard data, they don't have any because it doesn't support their case. But yeah, go to startmovement.org and you can find information about us. And you'll also find a link there we just started a fundraising campaign to retain legal counsel to file suit against the zoning ban.
So it's our tradition now. What's your favorite
Arlington
pizza place?
Citizen Media
Yes.
tradition.
Yeah, so over the past year, I've been coming to these city council meetings over and over again. And between the working sessions in the afternoon and then the evening sessions, usually I need some place to, grab some lunch or something. So I've been heading over to the Mellow Mushroom, and I found they actually have some pretty decent pies over there.
They do have some good pizza over there.
I have eaten there plenty. Also, I really like the place. It has a nice atmosphere, I think.
Yeah, it's got a really cool 70s vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. They have that cool bus outside, or sometimes they have the bus outside.
Normally, I think the bus is normally out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by. This was really fun and informative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure thing.
So you're welcome back
Thank you very
anytime.
much.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.
So that has been our show. I want to thank all of our guests for coming on and talking to us. The short-term rental issue is definitely an issue that's going to affect a lot of people. What do we got coming up?
Up next, we have an episode we're working on about Top of the Hill Terrace. Really interesting historical topic about Arlington, little known. Really cool, you guys.
Old speakeasy.